We spend so much time worrying about sugar. Diabetes, obesity, heart disease. Sugar gets blamed for almost everything wrong with the modern diet. And to be fair, some of that blame is deserved. But here's something almost nobody talks about. Gram for gram, salt can kill you faster than sugar ever could. Not over decades, not through some slow metabolic disease. In hours, sometimes less. This is the story of sodium, the mineral your body cannot survive without, and cannot survive too much of either. A substance so essential that entire ancient economies were built around trading it, and so dangerous in the wrong amount that it can stop your brain from functioning within a single afternoon. But to understand why salt is so much more immediately dangerous than sugar, you first need to understand what salt is actually doing inside your body every second of every day. Because most people think of salt as just a flavor, something you sprinkle on food to make it taste better. It's not just that, not even close. Salt, specifically sodium, is one of the most tightly regulated substances in your entire body. Every single cell you have is bathed in fluid, and the concentration of sodium in that fluid determines something critical. It determines how water moves in and out of your cells. This is called osmotic balance, and it is not a minor biological detail. It is the difference between a cell that functions normally and a cell that swells until it bursts, or shrinks until it stops working. Your brain cells are especially sensitive to this. Unlike a fat cell or a skin cell, your brain is enclosed in a rigid skull. There is no room for swelling, and this is exactly where the danger begins. When sodium levels in your blood drop too low, a condition called hyponatremia, water starts moving into your cells to balance the concentration. Your brain cells begin to swell. And because the skull cannot expand, that swelling creates pressure, confusion, seizures, coma, and in severe enough cases, death. All from something as simple as too little salt, or more precisely, too much water relative to the salt you have. And this is where things get counterintuitive, because most people assume the danger of sodium runs in the opposite direction, that too much salt is the threat, and eating too little is always safe. That's not entirely true, and the numbers behind exactly how this goes wrong are more alarming than most people realize. Here's how fast this can actually happen. Endurance athletes, marathon runners, ultra runners, soldiers on long marches are actually one of the highest risk groups for fatal sodium imbalance, and it is not because of too much salt. It's because of too much water. When you sweat heavily for hours, you lose sodium along with water. If you replace that fluid loss with plain water and only water without replacing the sodium, your blood sodium concentration keeps dropping while your total fluid volume keeps rising. Doctors call this exercise-associated hyponatremia, and it has killed marathon runners, including relatively young, healthy athletes who believed they were doing everything right by drinking constantly throughout a race. In 2002, a 28-year-old woman died after finishing the Boston Marathon, not from dehydration, but from drinking too much water without enough sodium. Her blood sodium had dropped so low that her brain swelled fatally. Studies published in the New England Journal of Medicine have since confirmed that a significant percentage of marathon finishers, in some studies over 10%, cross into hyponatremic territory during a single race, most without ever realizing it. Compare that to sugar. A dangerously high blood sugar level, hyperglycemia, can absolutely be fatal, but it typically takes sustained, repeated exposure over time. Undiagnosed diabetes for months or years, or a severe acute crisis like diabetic ketoacidosis, which itself usually develops over many hours to days. Not in the middle of a single afternoon of normal activity. Sodium doesn't need any of that. Sodium imbalance can happen to a healthy person with no underlying disease in a single day through nothing more dangerous than drinking too much water too quickly. But the danger doesn't only run in the low direction. Too much sodium too fast is arguably even more acutely violent to the body, and this is the direction most people assume is the only risk. When sodium levels rise too quickly, hypernatremia, water is pulled out of your brain cells in the opposite direction. The brain shrinks rapidly inside the skull, which can tear blood vessels, causing catastrophic bleeding. This is not a slow process. Case reports in medical literature describe adults dying within hours after consuming extremely large quantities of salt in a short period, sometimes as part of dares, punishments, or misguided detox attempts. In several documented cases, otherwise healthy adults died after ingesting roughly 1 to 2 cups of salt, not over a diet, not over months, but within a single sitting. The lethal dose of sodium chloride for an average adult is estimated at somewhere between 0.5 and 1 gram per kilogram of body weight, meaning for a 70-kilogram adult, as little as 35 to 70 grams of salt, roughly 2 to 4 tablespoons, consumed rapidly can be fatal. There is no equivalent threshold for sugar that comes close to acting this fast. You would need to consume an almost physically impossible quantity of sugar in one sitting to trigger anything comparably acute, and your body would likely vomit long before absorption reached dangerous levels. Salt has no such natural defense at extreme doses, especially when dissolved in liquid, which speeds absorption dramatically. This is why infant formula mix-ups, cases where salt was accidentally substituted for sugar in a recipe, have resulted in infant deaths within hours, something that has actually happened in documented poisoning cases and tragic kitchen accidents, because infants have such small body mass and such little margin for sodium fluctuation. So why does nobody talk about this the way we talk about sugar? Because sugar's danger is slow, visible, and chronic. We can see its effects build up over years: weight gain, insulin resistance, diagnosed disease. It fits into a public health narrative. Salt's danger, when it goes acute, is fast, rare, and often mistaken for something else entirely: heat exhaustion, a stroke, a seizure disorder. Doctors have to specifically test blood sodium to catch it, and by the time symptoms appear, confusion, seizures, the window to correct it safely is already narrowing, because correcting sodium levels too quickly can itself cause a separate, dangerous condition. There is no slow, forgiving margin the way there often is with blood sugar. There's another layer to this that makes salt even more unpredictable than sugar, and it has to do with who is most at risk. With sugar, the highest risk groups are relatively well understood: people with diabetes, people who are overweight, people with a family history of metabolic disease. You can screen for it. You can predict it. Salt's acute risk profile looks almost nothing like that. The people most vulnerable to fatal sodium imbalance are often the healthiest people in the room: endurance athletes with no underlying conditions, infants whose kidneys haven't fully matured and can't regulate sodium the way an adult's can, elderly patients on certain blood pressure medications, particularly diuretics, which already push the kidneys toward excreting more sodium than normal, leaving almost no buffer if fluid intake spikes. Even hospital patients on routine intravenous fluids have died from hyponatremia when fluids were administered incorrectly, a documented and ongoing patient safety concern that hospitals actively train staff to avoid. None of these people did anything reckless. They didn't overeat for years. They didn't ignore warning signs building up over a decade. In most cases, the imbalance built over hours, sometimes less, and by the time it was caught, the brain was already swelling or already bleeding. This is fundamentally different from how we're taught to think about dietary risk. We're taught that danger accumulates slowly, that the body gives you time, symptoms, warnings, years to change course. Sodium doesn't operate on that timeline. It operates on a timeline measured in hours, sometimes minutes once symptoms begin, and that mismatch between how we expect danger to behave and how sodium actually behaves is exactly why it kills people who believed they were being careful. This doesn't mean sugar is safe, and salt is the real villain. Chronic sugar overconsumption remains one of the leading contributors to global disease burden, and nothing here changes that. What it means is that our instinct to file salt under minor background dietary concern while treating sugar as the dangerous one doesn't match the actual acute physiology. Salt requires a much smaller window, a much shorter time frame, and far less warning to become fatal than sugar does. The next time you're running a race and reaching for water, or standing in a kitchen following a recipe, remember the mineral sitting quietly on your table, the one nobody warns you about, has a far shorter path to killing you than the one everybody's afraid of.